Tommy, we are recording this on Wednesday. They lost last night by 19 on the road. A game against the Wizards, playing without Bradley Beal. They had won 5 of 6. They hit a little rough patch there, but it looked like they were playing better, getting back to Missoula ball. And I think they missed an opportunity last night. We've talked about how important the number 1 seed is in the East, just being able to avoid a heavyweight matchup in the second round. And that's not a knock on Cleveland. I do think Cleveland is a great basketball team, and I'm particularly intrigued with any matchup with Cleveland. I would be especially with a Boston-Cleveland matchup, given that Cleveland has won 3 of 4 games against them during the regular season. We're set to enter a huge game Thursday night. Boston at Milwaukee. They sit 3 games back right now, and they're 2 games up in the loss column against Philadelphia. Still a chance to get the number 1 seed, but it does feel like we may be headed for a potential second round matchup of Boston versus Philly.
We talked a little bit about this with Legler when he came on last week. He mentioned their assist rate dropping. In their last 15 games, they're 13th in offensive rating. They're 13th in offense, 2nd in defense, 4th in net, besides Tuesday night against Washington. Do you feel like the offense has been better over the last 6 or 7 games?
I felt like it had been. It had been better. And I watched most of the game last night. I kind of turned it off towards the end when it was very clear that the Wizards were going to pull away, and I switched over to the Cleveland-Atlanta game to watch the fourth quarter of that. But, I'll reiterate what I've said. I think for them to win a championship, Jason Tatum has to be able to make jumpers off the bounce. He has to be able to make jumpers off the dribble. They are finally healthy, which is good. That's going to take some time. I think to an extent, these next 6 games are a chance to not only get guys rest, but it does sound like from talking to Joe Mazzulla, he felt like last season they gave guys rest towards the end of the regular season, and they weren't ready and ramped up to take on the heavy load and minutes played that is required from your best players in the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to see how they manage that. What I'm interested to see is how they manage the rotations, particularly the front court rotations with Al Horford, who he's paired with throughout the game, whether it's Robert Williams or Grant Williams, how much he plays alone at the 5, how much Brogdon plays with the starters and how much they go small. Brogdon, by the way, has been fantastic all season. I know we've talked about the 6th man of the year, but just to sort of update where we are at in that race, Brogdon right now has the 2nd best odds. Emmanuel Quickley is the odds-on favorite on DraftKings Sportsbook at -210. Brogdon at +150. Our guy Bobby Portis all the way down at +4,000. It seems like it's turned into really a 2-man race between Quickley and Brogdon. And to be honest with you, I got to be honest, as much as I love Quickley, Brogdon has come off the bench in every game he's played this season. Quickley, meanwhile, has started in 17. I know he meets the criteria for 6-man, but most of his biggest games are as a starter. His splits are very uneven when we talk about points per game, assists, shooting percentage, all that as a starter versus a bench player. So by definition of sort of how I view the award, which is a guy that comes off the bench, to me, Brogdon is my favorite. I want to get your thoughts on that.
I agree with that. I mean, the game you called a couple weeks ago in Boston, it's most of Quick's biggest games, and they've been great. They've been great performances, but he's been starting and he's been playing, 35, 40 minutes. And so it does explain some of this. Brogdon and Horford are both shooting 44.7% from 3 right now. 3rd and 4th are basically tied for 2nd in the league there. They were both over 45 for a lot of the year. There was a point where they were basically the only 2 guys with a minimum 100 threes taken, shooting over 45%. Do you feel like we've talked a ton about how good this team is, just from beyond the arc in general? Do you feel like these 2 are? We know what we're going to get from Jason. We know what we're going to get from Jalen. But I don't want to put the word X factor on it. But if they shoot like this is a very tough team to beat in general. They're a very tough team to slow down.
Yeah, there's an emphasis on 3-point shooting throughout the roster. They obviously have been 1 or 2 with Golden State in 3-pointers made and 3-pointers attempted all season. I think they're important. I think what's interesting about this team is when we talk about the playoffs and we talk about winning a championship, there are a number of players on their team, and most really good teams have this qualification. There's a number of players on this team that could swing a playoff game. We talk about the Milwaukee Bucks, right? Probably the best team in basketball, all season. A guy like Bobby Portis, the year they won the championship, came in for Giannis, who was hurt, and he had a huge game in Game 5 against Atlanta and helped close that series out. And so, like a guy like Brogdon, Derek White, who I love, Rob Williams, potentially on the defensive end, rebounding offensive glass, like they have a bunch of guys that could swing a series. Grant Williams last year in Game 7 against Milwaukee hit 7 threes. They elected to leave him open, and so I think that's the strength really of their team is not only do they have 2 stars, but they have a number of excellent role players. And the Bucks, to speak on them for a second, they're the same sort of makeup. They have guys like Grayson Allen, who is going to be really important because of his 3-point shooting. He's a huge key to their offense in the half court. Brook Lopez, obviously, Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton could be a guy that hits 3 or 4 threes in a half of a playoff game. Like these guys matter because you're going to spend so much time in the playoffs game planning for Giannis, game planning for Drew, game planning for Tatum and Brown. And there's a reason that these 2 teams, the Bucks right now at plus 320 and Boston at plus 330, are the 2 favorites to win the NBA championship this year. According to DraftKings Sportsbook, they're the 2 favorites. And I tend to agree with that. And of course, the third team right now is the Phoenix Suns, who I'm excited about to see at full strength because Kevin Durant's coming back tonight. But there's a reason. These 2 teams, we're on a collision course to see these guys in the Eastern Conference Finals. And I mean, give me 7 games of that.
Are you surprised they haven't been able to utilize Muscala a little bit more?
Well, I'm not, especially with Rob Williams back lately, and Muscala had played 14 to 18 minutes there the first 5 or 6 games. Rob Williams was hurt. I think that truthfully, and this is not a knock on Mike, who's had a great season and was fantastic for much of the season when he was in Oklahoma City. I think the view on that was sort of an insurance, right? An insurance for Rob. You're gonna want Al Horford on the floor. You're gonna want Rob on the floor. You're gonna want Grant Williams on the floor. Mike Muscala to me is an insurance policy for a long playoff run, and it's a luxurious. I would describe it as like an Hermes handbag insurance policy, if that makes sense. That's how I view Mike Muscala.
Your backup handbag is an Hermes handbag. If you forget your first handbag, you have an Hermes.
Well, you gotta start. You gotta start with the vintage Chanel, and then you get a Birkin. It's all that's the 1-2, the 1-2 combo.
That makes the last thing before we get to the interview is about Robert Williams. They're 21-9 with him in the lineup, but he's on this minutes restriction. And so I was going to ask about this when you were mentioning earlier about the Mazzulla conversation about ramping up, versus like rest in terms of getting ready to the playoffs. This has been an ongoing thing for him, over the last couple of years. Is just his on and off in terms of literally being on the court. So, like, how do you handle that with a guy like this who, you need to keep him healthy, but like he wasn't a factor in the Wizards game on Tuesday. I think he played 15 minutes. I'm not even sure he scored. And so, like, this is a guy that it feels like they need to be healthy to beat Milwaukee. And he is technically healthy, but it's also like, how do you juggle that, when they're sort of figuring this out over the next couple of weeks?
Well, I'm not going to put myself in the position of Joe Mazzulla or the Boston Celtics medical staff, in terms of gauging how much he should or shouldn't be playing right now, health wise. I think going back to what I was saying about their team and the makeup of their team, I view the Milwaukee Bucks the same way. You can play a number of ways, and depending on your matchup in the playoffs, we saw that a great example of this is last year with the Memphis Grizzlies in the first round. Karl-Anthony Towns had a big game, and then Steven Adams was basically on the bench for the rest of the series, knowing that he's probably going to be back in the lineup for the following series. And that's again could be the case this year. As of right now, it's Minnesota, Memphis, second round or first round, and then potentially Sacramento with Domantas Sabonis in the second round. And Steven Adams, if he's back in the lineup, will play a ton that series. So I think that's the luxury. And I don't know Robert Williams. I don't know what kind of shape he's in or how he takes care of himself and how he ramps up. But I don't necessarily think the minutes played is a concern. I think it's more about lineups and figuring out which lineups against which matchups are going to put you in the best position to be successful in each particular matchup in the playoffs. And that is the luxury of the Boston Celtics roster.
The biggest tournament in college basketball is underway, and the action is just getting started on DraftKings Sportsbook. DraftKings will be featuring parlays and odds boosts all tournament long, so be sure to check the DraftKings Sportsbook app every day to see what they have in store. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and sign up with code JJ. Right now, new customers can bet $5 on any pregame moneyline bet and get $150 in bonus bets if your team wins. Only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code JJ. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details.